Back when I was single, I had developed an interest in antique electronics, mostly radios and things like that from the first half of the 20th century. For me, it was just a hobby. I had a few collectible items in my apartment. But my friend at the time, Angry Bob, for him, it was serious. His apartment was, he was, aside from being a collector, he was also a hoarder. So his apartment was stuffed to the gills with antique radios, phonographs, things like that. But he also made it a business. He had ads in local newspapers saying basically, come and let me look at your stuff and I'll give you money for it. So people who had old stuff that in their basements that was just gathering dust would call him in. He would kind of talk about how it's really not worth anything, but he'll give them a little money for it just so it's not a wasted trip. He also liked to go to these antique radio swap meets and conventions. And I often went along with him because, well, I enjoyed a road trip with a friend. He enjoyed having me along because he enjoyed a road trip with a friend, and I also suspect he liked the fact that it helped defray the cost of gasoline and hotel rooms. So there was this one trip we were going to Rochester for a swap meet. And when Bob picked me up in the morning and I got into his car, I was shocked. This was something I'd never seen before. Angry Bob wasn't behind the wheel. This was Happy Bob. And it was great. And I didn't have to wait long to find out why. As soon as I got in the car, he's like, Moish, you gotta hear this. I just made $1,500. So what happened? Well, there was some old lady in Bayside who had a garage full of stuff. He gave her like $150 for it. He was keeping some of the radios. There was stuff he knew he could sell on eBay, make back $150. But the most important part of this was this TV from the late 1940s in pristine condition that he had sold to an antique dealer in Manhattan for $1,500. So he was thrilled. He was excited. And I was happy to see my friend excited. I was also kind of looking forward to this because, maybe he'd actually treat me to a meal. You have to understand something about Bob is that one of his greatest skills was getting me to pay more than my fair share when the two of us went out to eat. Most of the time it was just, he'd order a shit ton of food while I ordered just a hamburger, and he'd say, let's just save time and split it. And you have to understand, Bob tipped the scales at well over 700 pounds. So he liked to eat a lot. But anyway, we went up to Rochester. We had a good time. He was happy. I was happy. I was enjoying myself. We had a great time at the convention. I was just looking around. I wasn't really doing anything. He was very serious about it. But his mood changed when he saw the feature of the show, which was the annual contest for Best Find. There are people these antique dealers who had found something and gotten it that they thought was really special would enter. And the winning entry this time was that antique television, the one that he had sold to a dealer for $1,500. And that wouldn't have been so bad. Bob didn't really mind that. But what really hurt him was when he found out that the antique dealer who brought it had bought it from the antique dealer in Manhattan for $15,000. Now Bob wasn't happy about his $1,500 anymore. He was thinking about the lost opportunity. And he was miserable. And he was miserable that night. And the next morning when we were getting ready to leave the hotel, he was still miserable. And I hated that. There's nothing I could do because $15,000 is $15,000. But I had an idea. I suggested, hey Bob, instead of going home, why don't we go to Toronto? I'll buy, you'll get a donut at Tim Horton. I'll buy you lunch at Schlotsky's. But he said, nah, let's just go home. And I was disappointed because I was I like a good side trip. But I also knew that it wasn't really my place to insist because Bob was doing all the driving. And taking a detour to Toronto meant instead of getting home late that evening and being able to relax, this would be an all-night drive. I wouldn't get to bed till 5 or 6 in the morning. So I left it. And as we left Rochester, we went to the thruway. But instead of heading east, he started heading west, which I knew meant that we were going to Toronto. And I was happy, and I looked at him, and he looked at me, and he said, "We got to go to Sugar Mountain." Now, Sugar Mountain was a place neither of us had ever been to, but we'd heard about it. Essentially, it's the Grand Cathedral of candy stores. We'd heard stories about its grandeur, so I was like, okay, cool, let's go to Sugar Mountain. A couple hours later, we're in Toronto. We find Sugar Mountain. Couldn't find parking. So Bob suggested, well, I'll just pull over by a hydrant and go in the store. I was like, whatever, go in. And that's what he did, and he left the car, and I'm sitting in the car, parked by a hydrant, kind of feeling bad. I'm like, this isn't what I had in mind when I said, hey, let's go to Toronto. I would have rather buy him a lunch at Schlotsky's. A good while later, though, he came lumbering out of the store with big shopping bags, one under each arm, stuffed. And I was like, oh, wow, this is pretty cool. And he got to the car, he's like, okay, Moish, your turn. So I'm like, what? He's like, yeah, go in, see what you want. So I kind of went, I went into Sugar Mountain. Again, I'd been looking forward to the experience, but I was looking forward to sharing it with a friend. I wasn't looking forward to just going in alone. And I went in, and I will admit, Sugar Mountain lived up to its reputation. There were bins in the middle of the floor full of candy. The walls were covered with these ancient oak shelves full of candy. Every kind of candy I knew about. Lots of kinds of candy that I had known as a child that I thought didn't exist anymore. There were variations of candy, all sorts of alternate flavors I had never heard of. Knockoffs of candy. It was incredible. But it was also too much. I was like, I literally could not make a decision about what to buy and what would be left behind. So I just kind of looked around and took it all in and then left the store without buying anything. And I got back to Bob's car and he kind of looked at me and said, Mice, what happened? I'm like, I don't know, I just didn't want anything. And he kind of shrugged and said, well, okay. And I got in and he started to drive and I looked over and I saw he already had melted chocolate on his hands and he had licorice sticks coming out of his mouth. But you know what? He was happy. He was enjoying the candy. And that kind of made me happy. I was thinking, this is good. This is pretty good. But then he turned to me and he said, but Moish, $15,000. Thank you.